Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Herschel. I'm a professor in global development, and I was asked to come and introduce your speaker today because I had the great pleasure of writing 3 papers with him some years ago, and I think we're very privileged to have Leland Glenna, Professor Glenna from Penn State, visiting us today because he's one of the few people I know who's extremely broad in his understanding of the world, and he takes on problems that most people will run away from. And I'm going to read you some of his papers in a second. Because I want you to really appreciate what we're getting today with whatever maybe we'll all disagree with what he says and we'll chase him out of the room, but we'll see. Yeah, Leland's up for that. He's won in 2024, he won the Rural Sociological Society's Excellence in Research Award. In 2017, he won the Joseph A. Schumpeter Award, Joseph Schumpeter, famous economist, awarded by the German Central Bank. So not many sociologists win the Schumpeter Award, I guarantee you. He's won the best paper in 2013 from the Rural Social Society. So his papers and his teaching are highly rewarded. Some of his papers are, I'll just read you a couple titles. In 2025, he published a paper entitled White Christian Nationalism in the Rural United States. Very topical. Another paper he published in 2024, Household Food Security in the Agro-Pastoral Communities of Rural Kyrgyzstan. And then in recently, 2023, Regenerative Landscape Design, an integrated framework to enhance sustainable planning. So Leland's very, very diverse thinker, able to take on many different problems and willing to write about it. And so I look forward to his talk. Oh, I should turn on the mic. Hopefully this thing is working. Oh, all right. Yeah, I owe a lot to the people I collaborate with on all those projects and papers. Hey, Rick. And the same is true for what I'm going to talk about today. The basics of what I'm trying to get at are, what should we at land-grant universities and colleges of agriculture, how should we be doing our work to help small farmers around the world? And I want to give a shout out to Daniel Tobin, who was a student of mine at Penn State. He's now at the University of Vermont. He and I have been bouncing these ideas off each other for a while now. And then I don't know how many people here at Cornell have put in for the innovation labs. You know, the USAID was wiped out about a year ago, and they used to fund innovation labs. These were things that were based at universities, and you could apply for these projects, and you could do work around the world. Usually these were commodity-based, like I got funded for a peanut lab out of the University of Georgia to do work in northern Ghana, and got funded by the Hort Lab at UC Davis once to do work on sweet potato in northern Ghana. And so all those labs were eliminated. And now the Trump administration had decided that they're going to bring them back. And so there's this wave of people applying. And so a lot of us at Penn State have been applying for these innovation labs, and I'm part of a team that's been applying. And some of the ideas I'll be presenting here were key to that innovation lab proposal that we just submitted on Friday, I think it was. Yeah, anyway, okay, a little bit of background there. So yeah, so what's the problem here? The problem, you've probably heard the common mantra. United Nations projects that the global population will increase from 7.3 billion in 2015 to 9.7 billion in 2050. Therefore, what we need is extensification or intensification in order to achieve to meet the food needs of these people. And generally speaking, there's agreement that intensification through science and technology is the best strategy. Now, there's some complexity. This is the common mantra, but sometimes we have to take a step back. And some point out that the projections are wrong, right? So Mitch Hunter, for example, and Ken Giller have these publications saying, you know, some of these projections are a little bit off. Really, you maybe only need 25 to 70%. I'm sorry, something popped up on the screen there. 25 to 70% increase in agricultural production. And really, we could meet that if we kept at the annual pace of increase that we've been doing over the last, I think, 50 years or so. So the projections might be a little bit off. Another thing to consider is the issue of overproduction, which tends to lead to dumping of commodities on markets around the world. What this does is harm small farmers, limits their ability to sell their produce, and again, undermines these small farmers. Another complicating issue, as Mitch Hunter points out, is this we have to increase productivity while also recognizing the ecological limits, right? So this is another area of complexity that if we are at ag colleges around the country, if we want to meet these farmers' needs, we need to take these things into consideration. The other issue is just how many small farmers are there and how important are they? Some estimate that at a global scale there are more than 475 million farms that operate on less than 2 hectares of land. However, even though those are small farm sizes, when you multiply that by the 475 million, they control about 40%. Or up to 50% of the farmland around the world, and they produce more than half of the world's foods. Therefore, there is a good reason for us to focus on these small farmers. However, while I'm saying we should focus on the small farmers, there's a large group of people who say, we need to get rid of the small farmers, right? They are a drag on global productivity that we need to meet food needs. My counter argument is, no, we haven't adequately supported those small farmers. We don't need to get rid of the small farmers. In fact, we need to better support them. So the challenge from my perspective is to help these small farmers become more productive, that's number one, while also enhancing their social well-being, right? Can we get them to become more productive and also enhance their social well-being? So there are 2 prominent perspectives on how to accomplish this. The one which I kind of mentioned already is the industrialization. Let's get rid of them. That's one common thing. So this recent FAO panel of experts said smallholders believed to be poor and struggling for a decent future are envisioned to disappear, progressively replaced by modern, larger farms strongly engaged in global markets, right? We just need to get past them. The emphasis is on high-tech commercial inputs. By contrast, the food sovereignty perspective, often also expressed through agroecological arguments, is that this principles of rights and social justice need to be emphasized over economics and technology, right? We need to focus on the needs of these small farmers. Highlight the problems of environmentally degrading externalities from this export-oriented production and the commercialization of genetic resources. So what I want to discuss is that there are some problems in both of these perspectives, but I probably lean a little bit more towards the food sovereignty and so forth, but I think they have some issues we also have to address before moving forward. Okay, so the big question again, what do we need to do from a public agricultural college perspective in terms of science and technology to address these farmer needs? What I want to present is that the idea are that we need a systems approach to understanding the pathways and barriers to success along those pathways. Furthermore, we need biophysical and social scientists to collaborate in order to address these needs, right? So perhaps some of you have seen this equation. Anyone seen this equation? Few people. All right. So M times G times E equals yield. Really, it's about yield gaps, right? So how can we explain why you have higher yields in some places and lower yields in others? Number one would be management. Are they managing their fields properly? Number two would be germplasm. Do you have the right seeds, the highest yielding seeds, etc.? Number three is the environment. Do we have the appropriate chemicals and water needs to be met to make sure that farmers are as productive as they can be, right? So Tittenell and Giller had this nice article from 2013, When Yield Gaps and are poverty traps, and they explain that we've been focusing too much on the G and E dimensions in agricultural colleges and not enough on the management issues. Management is also important. So I was at a meeting with Ken. He and I served on the National Academy of Sciences project on genetically engineered crops. And that was in 2014, so the year after this came out. And I remember sitting across the table from him and I said, you know what you really need is an S on the end of your equation. And that would be for socioeconomic context. And he's, no, I don't really buy that. But that's what I'm going to try to argue is he should have bought it. No. But I realized that that might not be quite right. I think what we need to do is think about the social context for each of these dimensions. And I'll just highlight a couple of these things here, and then the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about each. I'm going to break down each category and look at some specific dimensions of each, the M, G, and E. But to think about how household characteristics of the farming household affect their ability to manage their property properly. Availability and access to seeds in terms of access to germplasm, variations in conditions at the environmental level, and how things like poverty, gender, and infrastructure influence their access to the ability to influence their environment. All right, so let's focus first on the management dimension. So the industrialization approach assumes that we can basically get rid of these small farmers, create this mass consolidation effort so that we have a few industrialized farmers running all of this land. You may, if you've studied Soviet history or American history, you know that that effort has been utilized in the past. In the United States, we had an industrialization movement in the 1920s. There was a similar such movement in the Soviet Union. It was called collectivization. And they shared a lot of the same ideas. If you look back, there was a lot of back and forth between agricultural economists and rural sociologists and extension people between the Soviet Union and the United States. You know, they shared a lot of the same ideas. At the same time, there was this Russian anthropologist slash economist named Chayinov, and he said, this is not going to work in the Soviet Union. This isn't going to work because small farmers are not utility maximizers the way the classical economists or neoclassical economists assume they are. In fact, to the extent that they're utility maximizers, they're maximizing household well-being, as in reducing drudgery. So we talked about this consumption labor balance principle. According to this, small farmers seek more land and produce more based on the number of workers in the household and on their consumption needs than on this idea that we want to maximize productivity and maximize, right? So the idea is reducing drudgery more than maximizing yield. So this student I mentioned, former student Dan Tobin, who's at Vermont, he and I have, we started talking about, you know, Chayinov is still relevant today, you know, and he took my class on classical theory back in, I think it was 2012. And ever since then, we've been talking, Chinoff is right. And so now he's at Vermont, and he has this student, Liza Makombora, who's from Tanzania. And she said, I've got data, we could test this. So she had this World Bank data and Tanzanian government data, and we did the analysis. We used these two waves of surveys of small farmers, and we found that indeed Chinoff is right. Household size is positively associated with on-farm labor and land area worked. So basically, if you have, let's say, it's not always family members. It could be a neighbor who's moved into your household or something. Sometimes what is considered a family in a lot of developing countries is more fluid than what we think of in terms of the nuclear family in the United States. So anyway, we find that, household size is positively associated. So as the farm or as the household increases in number, they take on more land, take on more work, but it's not to maximize the return, it's to meet the needs of the household. We also found, however, that as the household members engage in off-farm work, the land area declines, right? So that's a new variable for what Chinoff probably wasn't dealing with in the 1920s. So if farmers work off the farm, they don't necessarily expand the farm size, right? Because there's a new way of bringing in. And we also found that it didn't hold for women-run households, right? So Chinoff's theory breaks down with women-run households. And it makes sense, right? If you think women don't have access to the resources, they don't have access to the land that men do, right? So furthermore, they have more household responsibilities. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. All right. So the reaction to privatization, commercialization of the Green Revolution and the neoliberal eras was really, okay, let me bring it back. So I was saying what's wrong with the industrialized model before, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about what's wrong with the food sovereignty model. So food sovereignty emerges kind of as a reaction against some of that industrialized model. It opposes the corporate food regime, trade liberalization, et cetera, and it supports territorial self-determination and self-governance. All reasonable things to do. However, the food sovereignty perspective is based on a kind of a romanticized perspective of peasant farmers. Most small farmers, if any of you have been around to some of the small farms in Central America or West Africa or East Africa, and you talk to them, you realize most of them want to engage in markets. Most of them want some of the most recent science and technology that they can get access to. So this romanticized portrayal doesn't really help us move forward is what my argument is. If Phil McMichael were here, I'm sure he'd tell me I'm wrong, but, and I told him that I was going to be provocative, but he's at this other conference, so I would, yeah. So what I'm arguing here is that neither perspective recognizes the farmer heterogeneity that I think we need to have in mind when we're trying to help these small farmers. This term small farmer masks a lot of variation, and we can look at this in several different ways. Number one is just what does it mean to say we're talking about small farmers and how much land they're actually producing and so forth. And so if you look at just a handful of these kinds of studies. So the Sandberg et al., they say that 41% of global calorie production and 53% of what people consume is produced by these small farmers. Vinnie Ricciardi, who did work with me in northern Ghana before he went on to, well, help not get distracted here. Vinnie says that small farmers produce 30 to 34%. So there's a little bit of variation there. And then someone in your department here at Cornell, small and medium farms. So he includes medium farms. That means fewer than 50 hectares, produce 51 to 77, right? So how we measure these things can influence what we're talking about. But there's generally consensus that very small farms are important and have local significance, right? So This is a study that I worked on with Caroline Camacho Villa. She was at CIMMYT at the time, and I'll move to, it's hard to read, I'll just move on to our findings here. So we describe how 873 small farmers in the highlands of Guatemala had different capacities and needs, right? So we took these farmers, broke them down into where they're located, what they produce, how they produce it, how much land they held, various household characteristics, et cetera. And we find these 5 distinct areas, right? The diversified livelihood, that's less than half a hectare, but they're near an urban area. We find crop livestock diversified. These might be what you would consider the mid-sized farmers in Guatemala. And we find diversified subsistence and the specialized crop. You know, these are less than a hectare of land in both cases. And then we also found these self-consumption feminized, the garden plot and some livestock. The argument we were making here, so Carolina was at CIMMYT at the time, and she was a little frustrated because she, from her perception, the CIMMYT plant breeders and other agricultural scientists thought of these farmers as kind of a one-size-fits-all. And so what we were trying to convey to them is, no, they're quite complex. And each type of farmer has different needs. And we, as agricultural scientists, need to recognize the needs of these different farmers. Similar, Titanel in 2010 came up with a similar kind of typology, just to show that there's more than one of us out there trying to make this argument, not just me. And furthermore, to bring back this gender dimension, so this is, we haven't published on this yet, but this is our peanut project work in northern Ghana. We did time use surveys of farm households in northern Ghana. And you can see we did it over the planting, harvesting, and dry seasons. So the first column is planting, the second is harvesting, and the third is dry season. And what you'll notice there is that men don't do anything in the household, right? So now think back to the comment I made earlier about our study in Tanzania, that women don't act the same as men when they have a larger household. Sometimes they maybe don't expand their land use. It's probably because they have so much more responsibility in the household. But from this, the paper we're working on in this is we're trying to argue that agricultural technology diffusion efforts should keep in mind who's doing the work and how we, for instance, a lot of the, okay, let me get back just very specifically to this management thing. If you do any work with this management efforts, I've done some work with peanuts and rice in northern Ghana on this issue. And the management, the idea is that you should be planting in rows as opposed to just broadcasting, right? So it's dibbling, as it's called, for when you're planting in rows. And it's much more labor intensive than if you just go out and distribute the seed. So usually what happens is that a man will take at least one wife or maybe 2 wives out into the field so that you can dibble, right? So it's more labor intensive. And if women are supposed to be going out into the fields, then who's going to be taking care of the household responsibilities, right? We as small farm advocates should recognize that bringing a new technology or a new approach to these areas is going to affect other people differently, right? We need to recognize that. And that might be an obstacle, right? So as we describe it in our innovation lab proposal, choke points to innovation. And this could be a choke point. Yeah, so social context matters. The capacity of different small farmers to engage in optimal management practices varies. Key component of these management practices is planting in rows. However, not all farmers have the capacity or incentives. I was having a chat with a farmer in Guinea, And we were saying, why aren't you planting in rows? Everybody knows you're supposed to be planting. And this farmer said to me through my translator, it was my graduate student who was doing the translating. He said, we know how to grow rice. We don't have markets to sell the rice. So his argument is basically, even if I increased yield, what would that help? Why would I put that extra work into growing more if I don't have a place to sell it, right? A choke point. Simple technologies like a jab planter, right, could replace those two women who have to go out, right, because the man could do it himself. So if we understand the complexity of these small farmers, their household needs and so forth, could we develop technologies that would better serve them? That's the argument I'm trying to make here. All right, on to germplasm, the issues of availability of seeds and access to those seeds. So in general, some of the obstacles right now is that there's less research being done on minor and orphan crops. Minor and orphan crops, for those who don't understand it, are crops that aren't some of the large commodity crops like wheat, rice, maize, other kinds of big money crops. And so you don't have the research money that goes into the investments for that. Another key obstacle is poor infrastructure and distribution capacity. And one that I've been doing a lot of work on lately is how patenting and licensing for advanced technologies limits access to improved seeds for these small farmers. And then there's this intersection of poverty and gender also create obstacles to accessing the approved seed. Seeing people looking at their watches, am I running low on time here? High-tech large farm approach has been used before. I'll go over this quickly. This was, I mentioned earlier that the US and Soviet Union both tried to do this. They saw politically, the small farmer or peasant is a drag on progress, right? And the Green Revolution took the same approach. The Green Revolution saw small farmer as a drag on progress. We need to commercialize and consolidate. Yeah, so as he puts it, the Green Revolution advocates shared an enduring contempt for small farmers, boosted yields with commercial inputs, and the reason I think people keep harping on the Green Revolution is because the Gates Foundation, this high-level panel of experts at food security and nutrition, the FAO group that I mentioned earlier, and many other companies and governments still share this goal: use agriculture and science and technology to facilitate the transition from small farmers to large farmers. Food sovereignty, people are a little more skeptical of that large high-tech approach. And I bring up Montenegro DeWitt's work because she has pointed out that some of these high-tech solutions, such as gene editing or transgenics, they're not necessarily going to help these small farmers. And she points out a number of these challenges to meeting those needs. For example, agroecology as a science practice and social movement has long had a tense relationship with these advanced technologies and biotechnologies. A bolder challenge that rests on people's rights to make decisions and to co-create those technologies, right? So it's a little bit of a hostility to some of these high technologies. So what to do? I'm not as anti-technology, but I do recognize that we need to do certain things to make those technologies actually available. So one of the things I want us to consider is there was actually the first Green Revolution, according to Harwood, was the German Green Revolution, which took place from 1880 to 1900 or so. And because Germany was going through a tumultuous time, much of Europe was going through a tumultuous time, what's going to happen to these peasants, right? Why are they rebelling against us? What about the workers? They're also rebelling. So how can we pacify the peasants? The way they did this was they came up, they used plant breeders and extension programs to meet the needs of these peasant farmers. They took farmer realities and preferences seriously, and that led to higher productivity and broader social welfare for those peasants. And I want to suggest that we could do something similar with small farmers around the world, right? Created chambers of agriculture that operated 10? Okay. That operated like cooperatives, provided members with technical assistance, right? So what they demonstrate is that plant breeders can meet the needs of small farmers. By contrast, today, we're going in the opposite direction at most agricultural colleges. Some work I did in 2007 on how universities had started to look at using patents to convert public goods into private goods, because public goods converted into private goods will contribute to the public good. And I had this great quotation from a university administrator: by definition, the best commercial interest means that the public is buying it, which means that the public is benefiting. A measure of the public good is the moving of commercial product, right? That's exactly wrong, all right? So furthermore, my colleague at Syracuse, Rick Welsh, and I looking at the research on minor and orphan crops, and we found that as transgenic research increased, minor and orphan crops decreased. Why? Because most of the research money for transgenic crops was coming from industry. They are not interested in minor and orphan crops, right? So the university needs to move back to public goods. Yeah, we need to have a preference for public goods. This was very quickly, I was doing work in Germany with some plant breeders and other scientists, and they were, most of them were very interested in gene editing, but they said that gene editing is too expensive because we have to pay the licensing fees to MIT and Berkeley, because they have the enabling technology on this. So this one scientist said, the breeders that I know, they were taken aback by how much is being charged for these technologies. And these are not, companies. These are places like MIT and Berkeley, right? Universities should not be profiting at the expense of small farmers, is an argument I would lay out for you. So if we're going to patent the research, sometimes you do have to patent it as a defensive strategy so that someone doesn't come along and patent it and steal it. But once you patent it, we could take a different approach, such as non-exclusive licenses, cheaper free licenses, or open source. Yeah. All right, so on to environment, variation in conditions, access to inputs, right? So soil health, pest pressures, these are all how variations can emerge. Climate change is another thing that can affect variation in local environmental conditions. And poverty, gender, and infrastructure affect people's ability to respond to these conditions. So traditionally, professional plant breeders have bred for environmental homogeneity. The reason they do that is because they assume that we can use inputs and irrigation to homogenize the environment. So we can produce just a few varieties of plants, and they should be able to grow just about anywhere. Problems with that are, and most plant breeders today recognize that that's a problem. This is more traditional. But research shows that small farmers who save seed each season develop biodiversity and crops adaptable to their local environments. So we should be recognizing that when we bring new varieties, that it should become adaptable to local environments. And there's this interesting article from, I believe, Belgium. They looked at these, what they categorized as 4 different kinds of breeding: community-based breeding, ecosystem-based breeding, trait-based breeding, and corporate-based breeding. And she argues that what we really need is all 4 of these to work in conjunction. Problem is, I don't think most corporate breeding programs are that interested in working with anyone else other than to make profit off of it. Just the way it is. So one of the arguments I would say is we should move towards participatory plant breeding, and another idea is citizen juries. So one of my students, Crystal Jones, and I, working with Eva Veltzin in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, we evaluated a participatory plant breeding project. And one of the things we evaluated was the levels of participation. On the one hand, you could have manipulative and consultative. On the other hand, you could have empowering all the way up to collegial in terms of the interactions and so forth. But yeah, and what we found was research and farmers were mostly instrumental with the other farmers. But once the farmers began to work together on these projects, they actually developed collegial and even empowering. So we found, so the first stage started out as kind of instrumental. By the second stage, they moved up to collaborative efforts. By the third stage, where the varietal testing, we found that the farmers were actually kind of empowered. And then by the fourth stage, the farmers were actually collegial with each other. The scientists weren't necessarily part of it, but the farmers became collegial. And then very quickly, the citizen juries. This is a project I've been working on with some colleagues in Australia, and we just had this publication come out here where we were evaluating whether AI and robotics in farming is a good thing. This is the first time I've worked with citizen juries. So what we did was we convened citizens from two cities in Australia, Melbourne and Mildura. Mildura is a more rural area, and we brought them together for 1 to 3 days. We made our cases for yes and no for these AI and robotic technologies, and then had them deliberate. Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? And these were the outcomes. It was kind of funny that Melbourne was opposed to AI and robotics eliminating farmers, but the more rural area was a little bit more open to it. I grew up on a farm, and I hated pulling weeds out of bean fields. I was happy when glyphosate resistant crops came along. I didn't have to pull weeds out of bean fields anymore. I'm suspecting that's kind of what's going on here, right? But again, they're not exactly developing nation farmers in Australia, but it shows that people's perspectives on what kinds of technologies are appropriate can really vary, and we should be aware of those kinds of things. Okay, so back to the point, and I'm wrapping up here. So just to remind this model and how it might fit together. So there's great potential for the world's small farmers. Some of those estimates, right? Nearly 400 million small farmers. Can we enhance their capacity to produce food for themselves and local markets without making them redundant, right? While enhancing their welfare. And to summarize here, colleges of ag should promote collaborations between biophysical and social scientists and extension to evaluate these social needs, right? So number one, we should recognize the diversity of the small farmers, focus on minor and orphan crops, generate public goods, democratize the R&D process, and recognize the importance of local markets and supply chains. And I think if we took these 5 points as colleges of ag, I think we could meet a lot of the needs of these small farmers. So as you're all aware, the funding cuts and restructuring of USAID probably means this is a pipe dream. However, in 2029, I think we're going to have to rebuild USAID, right? When this government ends, we are going to have to rebuild it. And I'm hoping that places like Penn State and Cornell will be in a position to offer some real insights into how to address those issues. Number one is by educating many of the people who will serve in that agency. And then the other is to conduct the research that will become the foundation for that agenda. And so I think Cornell's, your new Ashley School would be pretty awesome. I wish I had $50 million donated to Penn State that we could use in this. But if I get this innovation grant thing, we'll have 20 million that we could also do something with. But yeah, I just want to kind of a pep talk here. We could, as agricultural colleges, we could make a difference. All right. Any questions or comments? Welcome any of them.
We don't have a roving microphone today, so I'll just ask you to speak up. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So just raise your hand, introduce yourself, make your question as brief as possible. Yes.
Leland, thanks for your talk. You outlined a program for the land grants, and what's your vision of how does civil society relate to this? Because your example of Germany was sort of the German government wanted to chill out these peasants from revolting. So it was a defensive maneuver from Germany. And is this happening elsewhere in the world, that this is a social welfare model for enabling a way of life, sustaining a way of life in the countryside that might go away given economic pressures? What are you really telling us?
Let me ask you a question back, Tom. Okay. In February, did you think that what Iran does with oil would affect your gas prices here? Yeah, you did. Yeah. Probably most people in the country weren't thinking about, well, if we anger some, right? The issue I'm trying to get at is these markets are global markets, very interconnected. The well-being of small farmers in other parts of the world affect us also, right? Just like the oil situation in Iran can affect the globe. And civil society, if you're talking about the public and how the public thinks about these issues, is that what you're getting at?
Well, what's the political, where will their support come from to make this? You call this a pipe dream. Responding to this.
Yeah, okay, I gotcha. Yeah. And I think the argument could be just what I was saying, that the well-being of farmers around the world, there is pretty good evidence that when people are not doing well, they want to migrate. Right. And they want to cross borders, and the United States is a very positive destination. Now, some of that research also shows that it's not a direct linear connection, because you have to have enough resources to be able to migrate. So it turns out it's more the mid-level improvement countries where most migrants come from. It's not the poorest off, right? So now I'm making an argument against it. We shouldn't invest in, because getting them a little bit better means they're going to want to migrate. No, but the point is, people are probably better off at home. They're better off not migrating. I welcome all migrants here in the United States. If they want to make a contribution to our world, good for them. But maybe they should stay home with their families. I know immigrants who miss their homes, right? If we improve things back there, maybe they don't need to migrate. I think most Americans would agree with that and would probably be willing to invest in it. If you look at polling on this issue, people are very much supportive of investments in USAID. They just say it should be limited to, 20%? When in fact it's less than 1%. I think it's less than 0.5% of our GDP goes into USAID, or has traditionally gone into USAID. So Americans support it even higher than what it has been in the past.
Okay, more questions? Ruth?
So Leland, thank you. Really nice to see you. So I'm intrigued and sort of gratified by your optimism that in a few years we may have a chance to sort of
me, I'm an optimist.
That development is and what development does, and I love the idea of partnering up Ashton School with Penn State to do that. I guess my worry in all of that is I feel like I don't think there's any things. But we are making a lot of investments in things like how do we get more patents? How do we more money, more? And I guess I'm in this friendly audience, are you worried that there's a path dependency that we're creating with the decisions that we're making that's making it very difficult for us to do that?
Yeah. Yes and no. Yes, it's is the work that I did about 20 years ago now. where I showed how the transition to private goods from public goods, the emphasis on public goods to private goods, and that is ongoing. But we also see that it doesn't work, right? We tend to spend more money as universities on our technology transfer offices than we bring in.
Make it up on volume.
Yeah. The UC system does. Yeah, the UC system does make it up on volume. Very few other universities do. Few universities make it up on Gatorade, right? The one big hit. And so is that the way we should be gambling on, that one big hit? And I think that's the way a lot of people, but yeah, it was just at a meeting recently, you know, the dean doesn't show up to many meetings at Penn State, but he showed up to the one about working with business, right? Oh yeah. And there's a genuine reason to it. You know, when we were asking these administrators, why are you doing this? Well, the governors will advocate for more money if we show we're working with business. Okay. So the problem is, yeah, we're not making much money, even though there's this idea. So I think not making much could be something that could benefit. The other thing, though, if you look around, so I mentioned the German scientist who said, this is crazy, we're paying all these. So it turns out Wageningen, another another large agricultural college, they have now said free licensing. Free licensing. We'll develop it and license it freely. So there is reason to think that we could go in that direction. There is an ongoing, so this is another paper I'm working on. I need to finish it up, right? During the Biden administration, they actually asked, are utility patents undermining productivity and innovation in agricultural research? And the answer is almost universally yes. So the paper I'm working on is analyzing the public comments to the government, the US Patent and Trademark Office. And with the exception of a few large companies, everyone else was opposed, or they want a statutory limit on the reach of patents of utility. So it's not much, but there is this recognition that these patents have gotten out of control. All that suggests to me that we might be at a tipping point, along with this fact that, in 2029, we're going to have probably a completely different government. God help us if we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Bang, is this the question online? Can you read the question from online audience?
So John online says, a key challenge is people who have deep appreciation for small farms, responsive agricultural ecosystem, don't have the monetary resources to build and deliver these technologies to the small farmers.
Yeah.
How do we mobilize these resources to the right places to enable us to enhance small farm productivity?
So I was at a meeting, it was a Zoom meeting with some Bayer crop sciences people in Germany. They're in Cologne, Germany, based in Cologne. I did not get invited to the second meeting, probably because they did a search on me and saw that I had written this article about how Monsanto has distorted the research, scientific research process. Oh, hi, Margaret. I just saw you back there. And yeah, so I basically pointed out that they use research misconduct in an effort to distort the scientific research process. So they didn't talk to me anymore. But during that meeting, they described how they collaborated with the World Bank and some countries in Central Africa to develop infrastructure, because they realized that they couldn't sell seed to small farmers if they didn't have roads and bridges to get to some of these more remote areas. This was they didn't invest a lot, but it was companies recognized the needs for these things. And I see that as somewhat hopeful. it might violate any of us who might have certain socialist tendencies. It's hard for us to imagine companies doing good things, but I think they can, if harnessed in the right way, could do some good things, and that they could be partners in this effort.
Last question, Benga.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I think you might have answered a bit of the questions I had. But in the last few slides, when you presented a summary of those recommendations, I thought that made a lot of sense and like seemed very reasonable.
Good.
Then I was asking myself, why isn't that already happening? Especially like what you said about off-farm crops, for example, like tending to the welfare of small farmers. And one of the arguments that the food sovereignty advocacy side has is that that is not happening because of these like political or geopolitical forces that kind of drive modernization, industrialization. And I'm even more sympathetic to that argument based on these recommendations because like some of the information I've had about like universities, for example, and why they're not doing certain things, why they're not patenting, like making research coconuts and all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious how you contend with that idea that the reason why some of this are not happening is because of these political forces or the geopolitical relations. That and it is so powerful that unless we contend with those, probably not make progress.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy by any means. I just say this is what should happen. If you care about small farms, I don't think it's, and you're absolutely right. So the orphan and minor crops, that research is being done in some ways. It's just not getting out because we lack some of these approaches to getting out. One of the things I heard while talking to these German scientists about gene editing was many of them were doing the work. The problem is that because you don't have to pay the technology fee, the licensing fee, to use CRISPR to do research on a plant. But if you transform a plant in a way that could be useful to someone, that's when you have to pay for it, right? So they're doing the work and finding out how. So again, come back to my response to Rich's question. I think there's a growing recognition that this utility patents on crop research and enabling technologies has gone too far. And if you talked, my guess is if we talk to plant breeders at Cornell, they don't like it because it restricts their ability to do research. And I know the people I collaborate with at University of Wisconsin and these German scientists I talk to, they all want to see it changed. Maybe we can make a change and maybe it becomes more available to people if we push hard enough for it. Not hopeful, but possible. Yeah.
That's a very good note on which to end. Thank you very much, Professor. Okay. Do take time to go outside. It's the sunshine out there.
Beautiful day.